Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We've now got over 120 participants in the room. I have the easy job this afternoon of just saying hello to everybody and just, I suppose, giving a bit of context behind the webinars that we've got coming up over the next few weeks. I think firstly, just to introduce myself, I'm Robert Morris. I'm the chair of the Division of Sport and Exercise Psychology. And the context behind the seminars and webinars we've got over the next few weeks is very simple, really. It's trying to bring the community together, so bringing the community of BASES and BPS and DCEP closer together, and really giving people an opportunity to understand potentially some different angles of sports psychology, different ways to promote your own business or your own approach, and really the idea behind the webinars is to bring those expertise together and hopefully give something back to you as a membership. So for me, it is just a welcome to everybody. Hopefully you will enjoy them. Please do feed back to us with what you felt has went well or what hasn't gone so well, so that we can improve moving forward. I think from a personal perspective, and I know this will be reiterated shortly by Richard, a thank you to Paul and Denise for the fantastic work they've done to bring these webinars together. They haven't happened overnight, and I know the work that Paul and Denise have done behind the scenes has been fantastic. So please take my thanks completely. And thank you also to Paul for today's session. I'm very much looking forward to it myself, and I know a lot of other people are as well. So thank you, Paul, as well. Richard.
Thanks, Rob, and afternoon to everyone, and thanks very much again for coming along this afternoon. As Rob has suggested there, it's great to have both BASES and the BPS coming together here, and whether you're on the CPAR or whether you're on stage 2 or one of the professional doctorates that is now around the UK, I think that the topics that are going to be covered in the next 3 webinars are going to be absolutely critical for helping you develop a whole variety of competencies to hopefully push the profession even further in terms of how we go about our business. So, as Rob has also said, thanks very much to Denise and also to Paul Morgan for their efforts in putting things together. And without further ado, I think it's probably appropriate to pass over to our host for this afternoon, which is Paul Cook. So, Paul, over to you, and thank you very much in advance for your webinar this afternoon.
No problem, and thanks for inviting me. So today, a few things I'm supposed to start with. If I do disappear, I will come back. I might need to log out, log back in again, but I will reappear at some point if things go wrong. If you have any questions during the session, post them in the Q&A section. If they go into chat, there'll be too much going on there to have a look at. So if you post them in the Q&A section, then I've built in some intermissions because I know that we can only stand so much of people speaking to us at one point. So I've been in a long training session today, which I know after a while we switch off. Another thing I've done is to put some polls in, so to get some of your input, some feedback from you. Okay, so I'll tell you a bit about myself, so just to give it some context. My name's Paul Cook. I left school as soon as I possibly could. Went off to work for an engineering company, worked there for 14, 15 years, selling engineering products to the commercial world, to agricultural world, etc. As I said, I did a sport coaching degree, sports science degree, then did coaching and development as an MA, worked as a researcher in the sport development department, then went into project management, so started to go look at projects. How can market project people, groups, etc., to put together projects. Then went to the starting to look at why people buy the products that they buy. So that gave an insight into how we market products, but also how people buy, what makes them buy products, what kind of things they think about, what does society tell us we should buy. Now look after a sport management degree and look after it in Hong Kong and Singapore. When I'm not doing that, I'm still quite a keen surfer, but my shoulders are a bit dubious at the moment. all that surfing for years has taken its toll on them. So when I'm not surfing, I'm usually walking the dog down the beach. So that's a bit of insight. That's kind of my story of how I've got to where I am now and what I'm doing. So before we begin, I think it's worth thinking about expectations and what you can expect from the session. So marketing is quite big, quite complex. There's quite a lot to learn. What I can't do during this session is teach you how to market your product or you. It's very individual. You know what you need to do. And as we go through the session, you'll see that how much is about you and how much you know your product. The other thing I want to kind of touch on is the fact there's no right or wrong answers as we go through marketing. So, for example, that I give to students is, if I was to come to you and say, I've got a product that's the same as our competitors, I'm going to sell it for 3 or 4 times as much as them, and an inconvenient thing to hold, would you invest in that company? Probably not. But then why does Starbucks work? How were they able to create quite a big business empire selling what you could buy locally in a paper cup to a mass market? And the answer is they just got the marketing right. They just knew exactly what the market was waiting for and sold it. The other thing I think we're saying about these webinars is having looked at what you've got coming, is how well they fit together and how they will address what we do in marketing and what marketing is about. So, as I said, there's a few polls. Now, hopefully I can get this poll to launch. Here we go. So it's just letting me know a bit about you, about how much you know currently about marketing. Okay, so most people seem to have completed answers on that. So yeah, so quite a non-expert audience for the most part, which is pretty much a good thing. It means that we're in a similar place to start with. Okay. So that's a good place to start. So quite a lot of the teaching I do is at postgraduate level. So we will have people come in from history degrees, from science degrees, chemistry degrees, all the way through to people who've done marketing degrees. So I've tried to aim the session at that kind of level where there should be things for people who understand marketing through to people who have never really thought that much about it. So I'm going to ask you to do a task to start with. So in management, we use a SWOT analysis. It's just a way of getting things on paper about who we are and what we can do. So we have strengths. So these are the key strengths that we think we have, things that we can control. We also have weaknesses, so things that we know we need to improve, and we can control those. So they're internal to us. But there's also external things, so opportunities. Perhaps we have strengths that can help us take advantage of those opportunities. And there's external threats to our business or to us as an entity. So can I ask you for a couple of minutes just to write down 2 strengths, 2 weaknesses, 2 opportunities, and 2 threats that are personal to you. So as you start to think about those, just be quite honest with yourself. What strengths do you have? What weaknesses do you have? What's going on in your external environment that could be an opportunity or could be a threat? This is quite a useful exercise. It's usually one of the first things I do when I start a project or start any marketing campaign or start to work with a partner, is look at what I can bring, what weaknesses I have, the opportunities it could create, and the threats that are in there. And again, this is one of those things that there's no right or wrong answer for you. It really is just a thinking exercise, really just a self-reflective exercise. And we'll come back to some things that you might have thought about and how they might influence what you do moving forward. So what we're going to do today is basically introduction. We've done that part. Marketing 101. So just the basics. What are the basics in marketing? So marketing is essentially complex. It really is complex. So it's a 3-year degree plus a master's plus a PhD to even understand the tiniest bit of marketing. So we can't teach you everything, but we could look at the basics, a good start to give you. Then we're going to look at branding. So how can you become a brand? What's the difference between a product and a brand? We'll have time for questions and then some key messages. So pretty straightforward session structure. So having said marketing's complex, Philip Kotler once said marketing is everything. So everything that you do as a person or as a brand is everything. So can be direct marketing, so posting on social media, doing advertising, doing things like this, being involved in this, networking, and also the invisible aspects, so things we can't control. So what people say about us, what people say about a product, what people even think about a product, so what people think about their worth. So as I said, I did social science and technology degree. The media hated it, absolutely hated it. It was waste of time, Mickey Mouse. Like we presented conference after conference, but we debated that. It was a STEM degree, so the thing that the government actually wanted at the time, the media hated. So there was all that invisible things going on. But then, as we got out into the world, we realised that yeah, people did want that degree. So marketing is basically communication, essentially a strategic way of doing it, and some of the non-conscious ways that we do it. So just by walking into a room, you're doing a bit of marketing. Just by attending these webinars, you're marketing. You're saying, yep, I'm this type of person. I'm going to get this kind of knowledge. So there's some kind of effect as we go through it. So marketing is everything that we do. So we need to just be conscious of the complexity. So there are some philosophies that we need to understand about marketing and where it's come from. So there's some very early ones that I won't go into in too much detail. But some of the ones that are relatively recent, sort of 1950s, is the idea of a selling concept, where we make a product and then we try and sell it to someone. Then we moved on to the marketing concept. We start to think, okay, well, what does the consumer need? And we'll make that and sell it to them. So then we needed to understand our consumer. We need to think, okay, what are their needs? Who exactly are we selling to? Then we moved into relationship marketing concept. Within that, we started to try to become icons, become friends with our consumers. So this is particularly important in the kind of business that we're in, that service industry, where we want repeat business. So there we've got things like becoming an icon. So becoming the thing that, oh yeah, I am associated with that brand. I like that brand. Other things are things like Tesco Club Card, which in marketing is seen as being one of the big moves in relationship marketing. It kind of changed how people thought about supermarkets, how they dealt with them. Other things are companies sending you emails, sending you some kind of, here's a discount code, you're our friend, we like you, and things like that. So having a relationship. But there's also other innovative things. So Holt and Cameron came out with a cultural strategy. So they called it cultural innovation strategy. So there they were speaking about what do consumers want, but how can we be part of their story? What part do they want us to play in their lives? So one of the brands we'll speak about later, Volcom did that. It said to its consumers, what do you want us to be and how do you want it to fit into your life? And they decided, okay, we'll give you products which were apparel, so clothing, and you could wear them the way you choose to wear them. We're not going to dictate how your fashion sense should be. So there it was, looking at the story that they want to play and how they fit into people's lives. So here's another one. What is the purpose of marketing?
I think it was the wrong poll. Just let me pull up the other poll up for you.
That's okay. This one. And I'll progress to the next poll. So if you could vote now, what's the purpose of marketing? Okay, so that's interesting result. So to inform consumers, we've got 31%, to sell products 45%, to create demand 49%, to listen to consumers 21%, and to exploit consumers 3%. So the truth is that they're all correct. So there's a bit of everything in there. Some companies will be able to exploit consumers, hopefully more than 21% listen to consumers. But being forced to, you can see it that people see it as a selling technique or to create demand. So that is quite a bit of marketing. But it's not everything. But most of it is now moving towards that listening to consumers and what they want. So let's see if we can get. Okay, so the next poll is, what percentage of marketing works according to Wanamaker? I'm not expecting you to have heard of them, but what percentage of marketing do you think works? Okay, so half think that 25% of it works. The actual quote that he said back in the 1800s was, I know that 50% of my marketing works. I just don't know what 50%. And I think that's one of the key things. Is marketing is challenging because you don't really know what works until you go in and really do huge, insightful research. So to get into research, so that's what I did my PhD, was looked at why people buy the brands that they buy. And it really is that level of interviewing quite a lot of people to get into that, to find out what works. So one thing that we could say is marketing is a waste of money unless it works. But the problem is that we never know is where we're wasting our money and where our money works. So what we need to go on is, why market? Why do we market? Why do we put the effort into marketing products? So it comes down to supply and demand. So philosophy of imperfect competition, Shaw in 1912, basically looked at supply and demand. So if demand exceeds supply, there's no need to market. So you've got more customers than you could ever produce products for. So you don't really need to market. So we kind of got to that stage of thinking, okay, if we do need to market, what do we need to do to market? So we could go back to Smith's paper in 1956. Again, he spoke about imperfect competition conditions. Again, it's the same thing, supply and demand. If we have more demand than supply, we don't really need to market. But if we've got more supply than there's demand for it, then we do. We need to have a marketing philosophy. So he came up with the two founding principles for marketing philosophy. First principle, market segmentation. So decide what part of the market that you want to work with, that you want to sell products to. So he gave a really, really good analogy of what a marketplace looks like. So he spoke about a cake. So you can imagine a sponge cake. He said that's the marketplace. Market segmentation is cutting through that sponge cake and taking a slice. But the complication is within that slice is multiple layers. So in that one market segment, there's layers that we need to understand. We might not want every single layer. We might choose a different layer rather than everything. The next thing he spoke about was product differentiation. So how do we make our product different to those that are very, very similar to ours, or that are perceived to be similar, or that meet the same customer need? So that's what we're going to focus on today, is that idea of market segmentation and product differentiation. So market segmentation. This is kind of the basis of market segmentation. So some of the ways we could think about what makes people different, what makes our customer base different. So we could think geographically, so we could think at national level or regional level. We could think of states, countries, even cities. Do people in those places have quite similar needs? Then we could think of demographics, so age, gender, family size, income, occupation, education, etc. Those people are probably quite similar. Then we could think of psychographic things, so social class, lifestyle, personality traits. Then into behavioural, so people's knowledge, their attitudes towards something, how they use a product, what kind of response they have to a product. So quite broadly, this tells us information at a very surface level and a very wide level. And the way I explain it to my students is it's basically a stereotype. You could create a stereotype. So normally we would think of, okay, your average British man of 25 probably drinks beer and likes football. But then does that describe every 25-year-old male in Britain? Probably not. So then we could start to play with these things and think, okay, stereotypes are stereotypes for a reason, because actually they're generally true, but they don't describe everything. So that brings us into other forms of segmentation. So how can we understand other things? So in the postmodern era, we've tried to think of segmenting at a better level. Even speaking about postmodernism becomes difficult. Postmodernism is the period from either late capitalism, where the marketplace dominates everything and our lives are basically enslaved to consumerism, through to the freedom that being able to buy and choose what we want to be, our identity, etc. has. So postmodernism is quite a contested notion that I won't go into detail, but it's basically the era that we're living just now. So we could do segment marketing, so a large segment within a market. So we could look at the sport market within the mass market. So that's smaller than our mass market. People who like sport, not everyone in society does, so we could say, okay, we're going to focus our product on sports people. So it allows us to finely tune the marketing mix. So we know we're going to use sport and imagery. We're going to use things that are associated with sport, words that are associated with sport, things that people automatically know we're speaking about sport in our marketing mix. Then we could think about niche marketing. So that's a smaller, inadequately served segment. So for example, one of the examples that I used to give was women's football. But thankfully, in the past few years, that's moved from being a niche market to it's becoming more mainstream, which is a really, really good thing. But then you need to think about, okay, what do people in those markets need? Do they need the same thing or different things? So for example, in my sport, surfing, we've got wetsuits. A niche market is women's wetsuits, because women's wetsuits need to fit differently to men's. So there's a niche. There's also a small number of consumers. So sometimes niche markets aren't particularly a good place for big brands to go. The return on investment isn't there, but it's attractive for some. Some people just want to focus on that niche that they can get into. Or we could have local marketing, so different mixes of service locally. So knowing things that you could sell in different countries. What has a local thing? So if you've ever, as I do, travelled a bit and eat unhealthily, go to McDonald's, you'll see that they often will have things that are very special to that area, to that country that you're in, that serves that local culture. So they've got that local market. And okay, it's a mass market brand with their core products, but they'll do something locally. There's also a micro market, so that's kind of that one-to-one selling or customized product. So there we're probably thinking about elite athletes, very much that product that's designed just for them. It's made just for them, or the coaching is one-to-one, and it all looks after them. So I've just done a project with a sport agent where he speaks about that, well, when I deal with this athlete, this is how I get him to manage his social media. When I deal with that athlete, he does it completely differently, because they're different individuals, different humans, different needs, different markets they want addressed, different feedback they want from people who they market with. So why do we segment? So part of it is to get a target market. So as I said, those layers in the cake that Smith spoke about, those are target market. So we might want to go after the sport market, but actually don't want everyone in sport. We want rugby, we want netball, or we want hockey. That's the target market we're after. So we're not all sports people, it's very specific sports people. And even within that, it might be we only want the elite hockey players. We don't really want the grassroots. So we're targeting the very, very high-end athletes. Or it might be we want the grassroots. So then we could start thinking about that target market. So within that target market, we'd assume that those people have very similar requirements. So we could start to group them. Okay, but what do elite athletes want? What's the specific thing that they need from a product? And it enables you to position your product. And we're going to look at positioning in quite a bit. Is how do you get into their mind? What do they think of your product when you speak about it? The other thing we need to think about in segmentation is differentiation. So how can we be seen to be different to our competitors? What different strategies are we using? And we'll come back to opportunities and threats. So we've thought about what opportunities are out there in the marketplace and what threats exist. Can we use them to get a competitive advantage? Can we fit into those opportunities? So for example, through going after a niche market or a micro market, is that an opportunity that other people won't follow? What are the threats of doing that? Okay, so if we go into a micro market and we have a one-to-one relationship and we're only working with one person, what happens if they take the business elsewhere? So what we're looking for is a competitive advantage, so that they always want to deal with us. What's different? What's unique about us? So as I said, you could probably all use a break, because I know that being spoke to in this manner is quite hard and quite difficult to engage with. So I'll have a look through some of the questions that you posted and see if I can give some answer. So one of the questions is, when we're starting out, is it better to find a market? For example, sprinters, rather than working with a wider audience? I guess the answer to that question is, it depends on your personal circumstances and what you want to do. It comes down to how many sprinters that you've used as an example there are, and how many of them, if that market's big enough to serve what you need to make a living or to get a return on investment, then yeah, focus on them. But if it's a wider audience that you need to break even, they can do that. So I'm thinking about kind of where your expertise would lie there. So I'll give you an example that I was thinking about the other night about different sports. And I was thinking about times when I've been surfing, where I pretty much thought, the waves are kind of big, I think there's a strong possibility I'm going to die or get injured here. And that's happened to me 3 times in my life, where I've paddled out when the waves have been slightly bigger than I'm comfortable with. And that made me think, I wonder how many people walk the football pitch thinking, I could drown here. so there's different things that in different sports that you need to specialise in. And of course, when you speak to your peers, they help you to rationalise that and help you to think of the risks. So, like, there's one place in the world where I go surfing that's it's not too bad for sharks, but you're quite aware of the sharks in the water. And that, again, is a different mental process when you go in, that if you think about it too long. I thought, I wonder if golfers ever think, is there sharks? So that kind of specialism. So when I speak to people who are in my area, they could speak to me about that. So sometimes that specialisation is a good thing if you're dealing with people, when you can get into that psyche and the stories that they need to tell about themselves. And so, yeah, it's a bit of a commercial decision how small you make your market, but it's also that kind of expertise. Can you build up enough expertise for sprinters to help them? I don't see. Yeah, so that's a good question about, so can you give guidance on market research for sport and exercise psychology business? For example, what are your thoughts on providing taster services in order to gain feedback? Again, that's a good question about taster sessions. It's definitely a marketing technique that works. So I'm sure you've all been in supermarkets where they're standing with a tray of food and you can like try the food. So if it's people who wouldn't normally come along, yeah, you give taster sessions. So it's something that you can afford to do. So your market research would maybe be about the people who have that kind of unsure market where they're not against what you're trying to do, but they're unsure how it would benefit them. So they can go along, get a taste and think, actually, this does benefit me. There are benefits to me coming along. So it's that idea of, there's some people who never convince, like they need your products, and you're looking for that middle ground. So market research is quite a good way of doing it. It's just going on social media, having a search around, seeing what conversations are going on, like on public forums, and seeing what people are speaking about and engaging that way. Or just marketing a free taster session, come along, give it a go. So another question is, can you provide concrete examples of somebody in sport that has done effective segmentation and product differentiation? So I suppose that every brand will. I could give you an example of a brand that did it and it didn't really work for them initially. So Nike tried to get into skateboarding. It's really well documented in marketing literature. So they came in and looked at a segment and said, okay, there's skateboarding. We want to get into that. So they identified the segment and looked at what they wanted to do. They kind of created product differentiation. So they called it Nike 6.0 and went through a different brand and said, okay, this is different to that, and got into that differentiation. It didn't work for them initially. It has eventually, and they've just called itself Nike Skate, I think now it's called. So they looked at that segment. Other way in sport segmentation, I guess things like Canterbury's one that is a rugby brand. So we have a lot of rugby players at our university, so we used to see it quite a bit. So they went after that and then spoke to them about, what would you think if they went and got involved in football? And they're like, oh, no, it's a rugby brand. So that kind of segmentation was, no, they stuck to that segment And the product differentiation was nothing really apart from the functional products. The functional products were different because different sports require different things, but actually the apparel was pretty similar. Do you think offering free work for marketing purposes devalues the profession and sends the wrong message that sports psychology is not worth paying for? Good question. Good question. It's a hard one to say. It's how do you start a business if it's you rather than the profession, but how do you start a business without giving something back if you need to? I think that's, and it's something I'm going to come on to later, and I really get that question. It's the wrong message. It's like marketing. Marketing is pretty much one of those things as well, where, and I'll probably repeat this later, but in marketing we find ourselves with people saying, well, marketing's pretty easy. It's just, you've got a product, you just do a bit of communication and you sell it. And I could remember it in our department, someone sent around a thing saying, oh, we're going to do all this, and it was this marketing campaign, and we were like, oh God, that's awful. And it was one of the sports scientists who'd sent it. And I said, oh, that's no problem, yeah, you should launch it. I'm off to take some bloods. And he came back and said, you're not trained to do that. Yeah, you're not trained to do that either, are you? So it's kind of that, yeah, are we devaluing thing? But again, if it's a marketing technique that works and it's a means to an end. And later on, I'm going to speak about the ethics and morality of what you're doing and the reason why you're doing it. So marketing is sometimes finding compromises. Is sports psychology worth paying for? If the consumer thinks it is, it is. If the consumer thinks it isn't, then it isn't. Sorry, that's not a very concrete answer, but essentially, yes, sometimes you can. And we'll come to look at that about positioning and branding. Okay, so moving back to the slides. So what is marketing? So effectively, marketing is an exchange process. We have a product to sell. We're trying to find customers who need that product. So it's about finding them. So doing market research. Who's likely to need your product? And sometimes that's where to be innovative is who really could help you, your product, who needs it. So in professional surfing, probably up to even less than 10 years ago, no one had any coaches. Professional coaching was completely unheard of it in surfing. It was kind of like people got good at surfing, turned professional and went surfing. Now it's full of psychologists, sports scientists, coaches, etc., because they've realised actually there's a competitive advantage here. If I have a coach, I'm going to get better. If I have someone giving me nutritional advice or giving me sport exercise advice, or certainly psychologists giving me advice of how do you surf big waves that you're scared of, then they realised they had a competitive advantage. So finding that what was almost by chance, where just a couple of people start to get interested in it and suddenly everyone does it. It's also about how you satisfy them. So what product do they need? And we're going to come on to look at products and how you keep customers satisfied. Then it's about keeping them. So you spoke there, or one of the questions was about that free taster session. So if you give a free taster session and people keep coming back, then you've done the right thing. So how do you keep them? Well, you need to show them that there's benefits to using your product and being involved in your product. So the whole point of marketing is we need to think about what does the consumer need? What do they actually need from consumer product? What do they want from it? And what can we offer in exchange? So what kind of values are they willing to exchange? So most likely, we will want them to exchange money, but not always. It could be things like prestige, esteem. The esteem of working with someone will draw on other customers. And we'll see how this fits together in a second or two. So moving to the marketing mix. So marketing mix is basically from the 1960s. McCarthy and Borden sat down, looked at what does every single business do? What kind of combinations of things do they do? So they settled on these 4 things. So they've got a product to sell. So what is a product? So it's maybe has a bit of variety to it. It's got quality. It's got design. It's got features. It's maybe got a brand name. So it's something that's tangible or intangible. So it's either goods or a service. Then they looked and they said, okay, people charge different prices. So it could be they've got a list price, there's discounts that they offer to different groups of people. They might offer different payment terms, might give different credit agreements, etc. But every producer has a price for their product. Then thought about, okay, so they're selling it in different places. So some of that geographical stuff I spoke about earlier. So the location where they sell it, the coverage. So is it mass market? Is it freely available? So usually when I do these things face to face, I ask if anyone's been to Hong Kong and think of Rolex. In the UK, there's probably a couple of Rolex dealers in each city. You go to Hong Kong, there's a Rolex seller on every single street corner. They've decided to cover the whole tourist areas because that's the coverage they want. It's exclusive, but it's available. Then you need to think about your competitors. How do you place in position to them? Then promotion, so all things advertising, personal selling, word of mouth if we're on the internet, social media marketing, etc. So all the things we can do to promote our product. It was basically a poll to ask you to think about what your product is. What is your product offer? What do you think your consumers look for when they think about your product? Okay, so you obviously know what your product is. So knowledgeable advice, yeah, definitely they want you to be knowledgeable to give you some advice. They want the feedback to be from a position of knowledge. Friendly persona, yeah, definitely they want people to be friendly who they can speak to. Value for money, yes. So a lot of this is to do with who your client base is. What do they want? But at the end of the day, what they want is increased sport and performance. So I had 70% say that, and that's essentially is it. What do people care about? Do they care that you've got knowledgeable advice? Yeah, if it means to an end. Friendly persona? Yeah, if it's a means to an end. Value for money, if it's a means to an end. And professionalism, yeah, if it's a means to an end. So essentially it's understand what your product is and what people want from it. So the product that you're selling is being able to jump higher, being able to run faster, being able to think quicker than your competition, be able to surf bigger waves or climb higher mountains, etc. So it's that increased performance that they're looking for. That's what they're buying into. So when we think about a product, we need to think about it at different levels. So here we've got our 2 hosts. So think about your membership of those organizations. What's the core product? What's the need that it addresses? So chances are you joined because you wanted more knowledge. So you're coming to these webinars because you need more knowledge. So the need is knowledge. Generic product, most basic way of addressing that need. Well, they could have a website. Information's on the website. Come along, read it. Is that enough? For some organizations, yeah, that is enough. It's like, yeah, the information's there, just read it. But we can get into the expected product. So what does the consumer want? They don't necessarily just want to read it. They might want a bit of support. So maybe online chat support. So they don't understand something, they could ask a question. But then we could get into the augmented product. So additional features. So the brand, so the fact that it's the organizations you've chosen to join that are putting it on gives it some credibility. If it it's a tangible product. It might be the warranty that they offer. So there is things like the proactive support, the talk session, so these webinars. So it would have been quite easy, as they've said, Paul and Denise put on these sessions, a lot of hard work. They could have just said, oh, well, COVID's happened, see you when it's finished. But they didn't. They've been proactive. Let's keep the knowledge going. Then we could think about potential products. So what could the product be? So COVID-19's making us all think about that. What is the potential product? What can we do with these products? What innovations are happening? What are the things we like? What are the things we don't like? Certainly from my perspective, we've got two camps in higher education. We've got people saying, look at this, webinars are great, they're great, this is the way forward, we could video everything and give it to people. And on the other hand, you've got students saying, I don't know if I'm going to go to university unless I'm being taught face to face. So we've got that bit in between. So there's a potential there, but what will it be? So when you're thinking about your product, think about the product levels. So what exactly does your consumer need? So you've said increased performance. So how can you get them that? What's the generic thing that they need? Maybe better training, better advice, etc. Maybe you standing next to them, giving them that advice, or being in touch with them, augmenting, so being proactive about it, etc. So think about the level of your product. Also, when you think about your products, think about a bundle of benefits. So when you buy a product, you don't just get that product, you get all the benefits that go with it. So if you buy, I don't know, a Nike t-shirt, people might look at it and say, oh, they're wearing that t-shirt, they're maybe a bit sporty. Or, oh, it's a really nice colour, they're fashionable. So you're getting lots of benefits. You're not just getting the t-shirt and how it looks, how it feels. You're getting a whole bundle of benefits of perceptions. Other things we need to think about is our place. So, geographic, where we are in the world, where we are in the country, so that whole north-south sort of pricing divide. So you get people coming to London, I'm sure, from up north, and as you can tell, I'm from up north, and going, £10 for a pint of beer. Everyone in London's like, yes, that's normal. So think about that, and that affects the pricing. So the place where you are in the country will affect price. So this really came home to me once when I went over to Thailand and was teaching, and we went out for a meal, and people had paid for me to have meals. And I said, no, I really insist that I pay for this one. And I was like, okay, you could pay. And when I paid, it was less than £2 for a meal for 3 people. And I was like, okay, right, I get that geographically it's cheap here. Whereas when I go to Hong Kong, it's really expensive to eat in certain places. So that place and position has an impact on what you can charge price. So you can see how that mix starts to come in to play. Also within there, we've got place position in the market. So where do you want to place yourself in the market? Do you want to be cheap and cheerful, or do you want to be the luxury brand? Or do you want to be seen as an expert, or more of a critical friend? Like, what position do you want to have in the marketplace in people's mind? Other thing you think about is that idea of pricing. And there's several strategies we could follow. So premium pricing, create a brand that consumers are willing to pay a price premium for. So luxury brand, it does something that other brands do, but there's a premium for it. So I could tell you a story about, I was flying to Singapore one time, and I was reading In-Flight magazine. I was doing a review of an Amiga Seamaster, I think it was, and the Rolex Ocean Master, or there's the other way about, I'm not sure, I can't remember, but basically Rolex and Amiga watches. And I went through them all and said, these are the two brands, this is what they are, what they do. They're both watches, they tell the time, they're waterproof, they do all of this. The Amiga is slightly better because it does this. And the conclusion was, but you should buy the Rolex because the Rolex is more expensive, therefore it's a better brand. Because they've gone for premium pricing. So that, what is the premium? Are you paying for a watch or the brand? And there was the brand. So it's that premium pricing. Or we could go for penetration pricing. So start with a low price to get some market share, then put our prices up as we get more market share. So that may be those free sessions, maybe have them as cheap sessions rather than free. Then as you get market share, you could start to put prices to a more normal level. The alternative, economy price, start with a low price, maintain it. Avoid unnecessary expenses. And one of the unnecessary expenses that some companies get rid of is marketing, which is not the thing to get rid of. But think of things that you don't need. What doesn't matter to your consumer? So I think back to my university days where we had two gyms. We had a nice gym that was carpeted, nice music, etc. And then we had a gym where the rugby players trained that was free weights. There was nothing nice about it. It was just about getting your bulk as much as you could. Training environment they were happy with, that they were comfortable with. They didn't need to be dressed in any kind of way or do anything. It was just like, no, this does everything they need. It's functional, and that one was cheaper to join. Then we could have a skimming strategy. So start with a high price. So if you've got something unique, and then wait for the consumer to catch up and offer similar products. So if I could get the next poll to load. There we go. The price I charge is based on, so what should you base your pricing strategy on? Okay, so just in the lead is how much people are willing to pay. So, and the next one is the strength of my brand. It depends on how much people are willing to pay. So there's no right or wrong answers here. That essentially is the whole choices that are available to you. How much people are willing to pay. Again, that comes into how much they value your service. So in the questions, that was one of the things was brought up. Does it devalue the professionalism if people are only asked what they're willing to pay, or will only pay what they're willing to pay? That works if your brand is strong and people can see value in it and they're willing to pay a premium. But if they're only willing to pay what they think a service is worth, then it becomes difficult. We as marketers should dictate the price, and we should create the circumstances where they feel that they're getting value for money. And often that is that idea of having taster sessions of until people see that it works, it doesn't work, or they won't perceive it to work. Strength of the brand, 56%. Yeah, definitely. If they can see that you're different to other people, they will invest in that brand, will pay more, or they'll pay for your brand rather than a different one. Where I'm located in the country is 29%, but that often can have different effects based on where you are and what the expectation is on price that people will pay. And not only where you're located in the country, but how many people like you're located in that part of the country. So I could remember one person I worked with when I worked down the southwest of England had a doctorate in economics, and he's one of the few people in that part of the country that had a doctorate in economics, and people used to flock to him like it was that supply-demand thing where people would go to him. So yeah, where you're located in the country will have an impact on the pricing strategy. If you are one of the few, then you will be able to charge a premium. Where you're located in people's minds, if you're seen as being one of the best people to deal with, then definitely that could have an influence on your what you're able to charge and what people are able to pay. Sorry, I'm getting a different message there. Oh, that way. Okay, right, back to normal. So the other thing we think about is marketing. So what do we need in the promotions mix? Well, we need to think about how we're speaking to people, what we're doing. So advertising, got to do some direct advertising. Sorry about that, I'm getting a box coming across. So what promotions we need to do? So we could do direct advertising. We could do public relations. So get people speaking about us, what our service is, what it does. Then we could go through personal sales. So selling one-to-one with people, getting out there, telling them about our product, going to clubs, going to schools, etc. Then we could do sales promotion. So that idea of a free taster session, buy one, get one free, buy 10 sessions for the price of 8, etc. Other things we could do are get involved in sponsorship. So sponsor people. So that doesn't necessarily need to involve any exchange of money. So our sponsorship could be to go along to a local club and offer to do a session for them, so that they start saying, oh, we're sponsored by, or you get some kind of in-kind association with them. You start to be associated with that club. So they're the options that are open to you is to advertise directly your services. So you can do that on social media, and we'll come on and look at social media soon. And public relations. So again, get in the newspaper, like local sports person does this and thanks, and one of the people to thank, and suddenly people are like, oh, well, if they're using that, maybe I should use that. Like I said, personal sales of that, going along face-to-face with people, meeting people, going to sports events and chatting to them, telling them about your services. And then sports promotions, we spoke about that buy one, get one free type thing. One of the challenges in marketing is that idea of integrated marketing and communication. So marketing, again, is just communication. That's all it's about. It's just letting people know you're there, what you do, and what you've got to offer. But as part of that, you need to be consistent. So that's where integrated marketing and communication comes in. Everything that you do needs to be consistent. You can't have a social media site saying, we do this, and we charge £10 an hour, and we're advertising something else for £15 an hour. People will see that. So your market is integrated. Everything needs to fit together. So if you think about building a brand, if you're going to have a colour for your brand, make sure that colour's on absolutely everything. If you're going to have a font for your brand, make sure that font is consistent. If you're going to use photographs, make sure you're using consistent photographs or consistent imagery. So the whole time, think about what is consistent. You need to be able to control the parts that you can control. The other thing you need to think about is when you're communicating is what's the clarity that you're communicating. You can't claim to be a luxury product and then sell at a cheap price, because then that marketing mix doesn't work. So you need to be sure that you've been clear in your communication. What exactly are you offering? What exactly is your product? What is the consumer likely to get from it? So that communication strategy becomes almost an exchange between people. So you need to think about what are the things you can control. So there's things that matter to you, that are important, and there's things that you can control. And what you should be focusing on is that bit in the middle. Is what is it you can control? You could control the communication that you're sending out there. You could communicate what knowledge you have, how educated you are. You could control who you are as a person. Does it matter to you that you're doing the things that you want to do? So, for example, we all live in the real world. You do jobs. Sometimes some part of it isn't nice. Sometimes some part of it is great. What's the things in that you can control? So to me, things that matter in my job is educating the students so that they go off and get really good jobs. Things that I can't control is the external environment. So I focus on looking at the external environment and controlling those little bits. What matters to me is getting them jobs. So I try to look at what do they need to the external environment and pass on information. And that's where my focus is. Other things that you need to think about is how people perceive things that are going on. So things that matter to people. So what matters to you probably matters to your consumers. So think about the things you can control for them. Okay, so stop there and have another little break, and hopefully I can get into some questions again. Okay, so first question is your thoughts on the role of influencers in terms of that relationship marketing concept. A lot, I'm too old for influencers, but a lot of my students have done research projects this year on influencers, and yeah, they seem to be quite influential as influencers you'd expect, but they really do seem to be quite influential in sport. So a lot of people have moved away from corporate brands and now focus on personality. So one of the things we're going to look at is that kind of personal branding. So these people who set themselves up as brands seem to be really influential. So that relationship, people don't want a relationship with necessarily a corporate brand, but they want a relationship with a person who is the face of that brand. So definitely influencers are a way of marketing, a good way of marketing. We're starting to get to a point where we know what influencers are. They're just a marketing technique. They're being paid, etc. So people are starting to become cynical to them. So it's important. It's the right influencer. So knowing your marketplace. So one of my students looked at who are the key influencers, and they looked at male influencers, and there was quite a few. But in female influencers, there were three that the males and females tend to say, no, they're the key people just now. So I guess it's picking the right one. What are the ethical issues need to be considered when treating psychological services as a product? I guess within that, it is a product because you're selling it. But it's a service, essentially. It's a service product. So it's doing something, it's making a change. So it is a product, so that's how we need to accept. So there's nothing unethical about selling a service. So you have gone off and educated yourself to a point where you can now sell your knowledge. So you've got intellectual property that you can sell to people. So there's no ethical issues really there. I suppose as long as you're doing good, which you would, because that's the whole ethical debate is, are you doing good but by selling your product? So for example, one of the things I thought about with this webinar was that knowing your level of expertise and not going beyond that, that's when we get into ethical debates. So if you were trying to advise somebody who needed advice beyond durability, that's where it's unethical to sell that product. So trying to give you examples without going into legal stuff. But I suppose it's that idea of people who coach beyond their ability. So we often see it in coaching where people will just get carried along, and as the athlete progresses, they won't say, oh, that athlete now needs to go to another coach who's got more ability. They'll just try to keep doing it. So it's that kind of sport and parents type thing where they've taught their kid how to play sport and think, I'm just going to keep doing it. And actually, no, ethically it needs to go to someone else. So next question, is there a different approach to selling tangible products, e.g. watch, t-shirt, and selling knowledge based on a service? I guess there is. Tangible products, I suppose people could touch and they could feel and they could see it and say, yep, I'm willing to pay for that. I could see the quality there. Whereas when we're selling services, it's difficult because they don't always know what they're buying or what good it's doing them. So it's like in education. One of my students has just completed a PhD looking at students. What do they expect when they come to university and what do they get out of it? And a university degree is that. It's just, it's selling knowledge. Is it any good to them? Well, we do a thing at the end of the degree where the government asks people how good the degree was, when actually it's going to be 3 or 4 years before they know that. So selling a service is different. The approach is about, I suppose, is building that brand equity and brand reputation where people at least say, well, it's worked for other people, so it probably is going to work for me. And I suppose another part of it is having that kind of accreditation. So your BASES and British Psychology, having that accreditation so that you show that there is some worth behind it. So it's like when I tend to use my doctor bit of my name, I don't use it a huge amount in the UK because and only in certain circumstances, because it doesn't really matter. Whereas when I go to Asia, I use it quite a lot because there it's quite meaningful and they're like, oh, you must be educated. Whereas in Britain, it's a bit like, oh, you've got a PhD, I have no idea what that is. so that whole service and knowledge thing is there. Wonder what impact remote working will have on location and pricing. Yeah, that's a good question. It could work anywhere in the world. I noticed that I think it was Barbados is saying to British people, do you want to come out and spend a year here and work remotely? So location, that might go. Pricing, yeah, that's a really, really interesting one. Is will it drive prices down? And I guess that will come to quality. And I suppose it's that thing of what is the value people attach to things? Do they want to be sort of gain knowledge remotely, or do they prefer face-to-face, that kind of thing? Do they prefer human interaction? Maybe it will create 2 price points. It will be, you could have my product, which is online, and you could have my product, which is face-to-face. Maybe there will be 2 pricing strategies for there. I guess the long-term thing is what works. So if the remote working doesn't work, then the prices are relevant. So it's a bit like these webinars. If we were face-to-face, we'd be chatting, we'd be giving anecdotes. I would be able to say things that I won't say in a recorded session. So I'd name brands that I like and don't like it, etc., and tell you why. And people would come back and say, oh, I love that brand. So I have that argument with my next door neighbour the whole time, because there's a brand I like that he doesn't like, and there's a brand he likes that I don't like, and we kind of debate and have a laugh about it. We were talking a lot about products, but what if we, as a practice, essentially a product working at a micro individual level? Is there a difference to how we then market ourselves? We're going to come on to that. We're going to come on to personal branding, but it's a yes and no. It's yes, there is a difference because you are the product, so you could very, very much control it. But at the same time, it's about, I suppose, you being different and you being comfortable with what the product is and what the product should do. and we're going to come on and look at ethics and morality a bit. Is email marketing a good strategy, and which formats are suggested for training, sport and exercise psychologists? I would say no. Pretty much the kind of it's kind of been and done, and most people don't. I mean, speaking from my students, they don't use emails quite a bit. So I would say that email marketing probably doesn't work unless it's very, very targeted and people know who you are, expect the email, or it comes through an intermediary. So someone else who can market on your behalf. So perhaps a coach marketing or sending an email on your behalf would work. Right, so with 100+ people on this webinar, all generally work in the same niche market, selling what's essentially the same product, how do we differentiate? We are going to come on to that. That's exactly the next thing we're coming on to. Can you give examples related to knowledge-based services then? Most of the examples you've used are tangible products. Yeah, so things like the media is based on knowledge exchange. So anything to sign up for on the media is based on them transferring knowledge. Coaching, all the coaching degree students that we put through are based on selling a service. So they're very much on marketing a service. I suppose the thing to say is marketing a service and a tangible good isn't really that much different. It's you as the marketer who is in control of the message. So it doesn't really matter if it's tangible or intangible. It's more the message, but also, or the start of the message, but it's then what you put in the content of that message. So for example, you'd never market a watch by saying, buy our watches that could let you tell the time. Whereas for a service, you might say, like, our service has allowed so many athletes to take this off their time. So it's almost selling the results, and we're going to look at that as well later about what do people actually buy when they buy something. What do you think about the role of endorsements, testimonials, and balance of confidentiality? So I'm going to come on to that as well, but that's a really, really good point, and that's one that when I did this live last time was a good question about it that I hadn't really thought about, but we're not being quite involved in your service. I suppose it comes down to how much you could anonymize things and how much permission you have to use those testimonials. So if it, for example, is something like we showed a 10% decrease in time for a performance runner or for a distance runner, that's fine. But once you start getting into naming names, etc., it becomes really, really difficult. I'm going through that just now, where I have done an interview with an elite athlete, and they want to remain entirely anonymous, and we're almost at the point where just calling them an athlete and not saying what sport they're in, what gender they're in, what age they are. But that decreases the significance of the actual study, but it might just be the only way getting it published is because they really want to remain anonymous. So it's down to whoever you're working with, and even if they say, "Oh yeah, you could name me," I wouldn't. I would be vague about them. But if they want to name you, that gives you that PR, which is the way to go. So how can we ensure that we are GDPR compliant in our marketing strategies? Again, it's the same thing as by making sure that you name no one, nothing that's identifiable. So the kind of discussions I'm having just now is, if someone hacked your computer and got into it and found out who someone was, there's very little you can do about that. But if by reading what you've put out, they couldn't guess who it is, you're pretty much compliant. And again, it's that case of what do they want and what do they expect, and levels of anonymity, and doing that for them, but just making sure that it's vague enough. Okay, so we'll move on to the next part. So here we're thinking about what is a brand. So something simple, just make something different. So it's about differentiation. So there, put a picture of a sheep with a blue circle on its back. Someone has branded that to say that sheep is different to another sheep. But then we need to think about what makes a product into a brand. Like what is it that we need to do? So we're going to start to look at that. But first I'm going to launch another poll, hopefully. Okay, so in this poll, what makes you different? So the question was, there's 100+ people on this webinar. How do they differentiate? But what makes you different? Okay. So there we've got results. So you asked what makes you different. As you can see, you've done that yourself. There's things that make you different. So the level of qualification that you have makes you different to perhaps your competitors. The sport and background that you've had, and we're going to look at why that's important shortly. Youthful exuberance. Yeah, that kind of can-do attitude can be really, really infectious. It's what some people need. Wisdom of age. So sometimes age and experience are the things that people look for that makes them different. And niche sport knowledge seems to be the highest scoring one. So again, it's thinking, okay, there's 100 people on here, but if we were in a room, I'd say, okay, who's interested in football? Who's interested in cricket, rugby, netball, swimming, etc.? And you'd all put your hands up. So there's different niches. That's what makes you different. It's that idea of you all bring different knowledge. Who do you want to work with? Some people will be grassroots. Other people will be really want to work with talented youngsters or want to work with really experienced athletes. So it's kind of like that differentiation that you bring to yourself as the product. So what makes a product into a brand? So two ways of thinking about it is the concept created by the marketer, so us. So it's the stories that we tell, the communications we put out, the fact that we're saying, I am just this product, I'm not like the person sitting next to me, I'm actually different. This is the communication I want to put out. But also it's the brand equity created by the consumer. So they create you into a brand. They say, actually, this person helped me. They did this, and that starts to create word of mouth. Which one can we control? I suppose it depends on what your view of marketing is. Some people would say you can only control the concepts that you create, but it could also be the brand equity that's created by the consumer. So how we deal with consumers, the messages we're sending, our results with them, etc., help to create that brand equity for them. So just now, I was reading an article about COVID. The two things that are driving marketing and driving consumption are convenience. So people are shopping online to do that. So yeah, we want convenience. The other thing is compassion and collaboration. So brands that are seen to be compassionate and are seen to be working in collaboration with consumers and with, I suppose, everyone in the country are starting to really see buyback on their products. So people really starting to like them. So I don't know, I presume other people are doing this, but I'm starting to drop a list of brands that I don't want to be associated with anymore, just because of how they've reacted during COVID, the things that they've done. I'm like, yeah, that isn't my values, and don't really want to be interested in or don't want to consume you anymore. So we're starting to see that. To me, they've just gone back to being a product. Yeah, it's something I could choose. They're no longer a brand. They don't share values with me. So they could control that. They could control the equity that I have. Other thing to think about is, what is a brand? So a study found 12 broad definitions in the literature. So even as marketers, we don't know what a brand is. it's kind of a lot of things. So it's a name, a term, a signal, a sign, a design, whatever, it's legal protection, but something that makes it different. And consumers could view that a brand is an important part of the product. So it's not just the product, it's actually the brand. So I've used a symbol down there. So if you skate or snowboard or surf, you probably know that brand. So it's a brand called Volcom. So they've gone after a market segment of basically skateboarders, surfers and snowboarders. Well, if you don't know that, that's fine because you're not the target market. If you do know it, you probably are. But seeing that on a t-shirt or a piece of clothing is symbolic, because I think, yeah, I want to be part of that brand because they like the sports that I like. So brands are meaningful to consumers. So how do we go about that? How do we build a brand? So 3 stages essentially. Go through the commodity stage, then through differentiation, and then brand, so you as an icon. So building a relationship with consumers. First stage is the commodity. So not universal, some of these things mean different things to different people, but it's basically products that we don't put a lot of thought into, we don't think have been differentiated. So they've got a pair of socks, yeah, one pair of socks, pretty much like another. Potato, yeah, pretty much the same. Golf tees, the same. Surfboard backs, same, don't put a lot of thought into it. Bottle of water, well, water's water. But back in 1980, Theodore Levitt wrote a paper saying everything can be differentiated, any commodity. And then he ended his paper with a joke saying, who knows, someone will maybe be able to make differentiate bottled water. 10 years later, we had a whole bottled water industry. And you just thought, wow, if he would have put his investment into that instead of writing a paper. But to some of us, it is different. So what a commodity is isn't universal, but generally the things we think, yeah, they're pretty similar. So we want to get beyond that stage. So there's supply exceeds demand. No distinction between the commodity and similar or others. So we don't really notice much difference between one or the other. Consumer perceives the good as utilitarian. Yeah, it consumes a need. So I'm going to drink a bottle of water, but I would have rather had orange juice. But yeah, water fills the need to that thirst. So we've got nominal products there, something we don't really give much thought to. So we want to move beyond that. So some of the questions there were about sports psychology. How do we keep the profession in value? How do we get beyond that nominal product stage? So we don't want to be a commodity. We want to have differentiation. So some of the strategies that brands use are logos, colours, values, the positioning, personnel. So when it's a service industry, sometimes it's values. Sometimes it's that positioning. Sometimes it's the personnel. If it's you, it's who you are as a person. Do people like dealing with you? Do they see what they want as an outcome when they speak to you? What kind of values do you have? Do you have shared values? What kind of positioning have you taken? Are you only interested in working with elite performers, and that way you don't really have much time for grassroots? And that's fine, because that's what we need. We need that differentiation, people working with people who they want to work with. I'll come into this in the next stage. So some of the things that brand isn't. So Naomi Klein wrote a book called No Logo, saying no one has ever bought a product since the 1980s. Consumers only buy brands. And she thought that was kind of a bad thing. It was like globalization's taken over. So we're into that kind of push back against branding, where brands aren't necessarily a good thing. Big brands are kind of killing the smaller brands and creating an environment that isn't conducive to consumers. I would argue that there's consumer choice in there. Big brands only get big because as consumers we accept them. So they're not necessarily bad. Marketing, so some of the questions almost had that a degree of, I'm almost guilty about marketing. But marketing isn't a bad thing. Marketing can be a good thing. So there was recently a special edition of a marketing journal that said, it looked at what are all the good things marketing does. Because often we think of marketing as being that kind of selling things to people who don't really want them. Whereas you think of campaigns like This Girl Can, that marketed, let's get girls involved in sport, let's make them feel confident about getting involved in sport. We've got lots of public health marketing that goes on that's telling people this is how you should eat, this is how you should exercise, not in a kind of big brother way forcing you to do it, but just giving you that information. So marketing isn't necessarily a bad thing. Other things we could think about is people buy things for what they symbolically represent. It might be that you're a sports psychologist or deal in sports exercise sciences, where people are saying, oh, I've got this. I'm at this stage in my development as an athlete where I now have a coach and I've got a psychologist and I've got that. So those shared values, this person understands me, we've got meaning and identity. And essentially it comes down to, what does the consumer value? What is it they want? What they're looking for from consuming your product. So we're going to come on to that idea of personal branding, which is essentially you become the product, which we all have. It's impossible not to have a personal brand. The minute someone sees us in the street, they kind of assign a role to us. We become something. So personal branding is the first thing people think about when they see you or hear your name. Oh, that's that person. That's what they're like. Well, that's just a brand. It's just a way of differentiating you from another person. But you can control that, or you could certainly influence what people think about by guiding information that they receive, by telling them more about you, what you are and what you do. So you could communicate with them. So if you want to know, think about your self-perception. At the start, I asked you to write a SWOT analysis. That's how you perceive yourself. You said what your strengths were, what your weaknesses were. Ask your friends and peers, what am I like? Who am I? What do you think about when you think about me? So, and you often get things that you don't necessarily expect. You get feedback about what people think of you. So if I asked in set circles, people will be like, oh yeah, you're a lecturer, so you must know something about something. But when I go back to the people who I worked in engineering company, they're like, oh, you're just a surfer who keeps messing about. He's like, yeah, because that's my personal brand and it's complex. That's what it is. But different circumstances, I will be different things. But I'm always authentic. I would never be anything different. And that's quite a key part we're going to look at, that idea of authenticity. So communicate what your personal brand, what you want it to be. Tell people about it. So quite a big part of that is building brand equity. So telling people or helping them to think about what they should think about when they see you, how they should perceive you. So I often get that about, oh, you need to design this program, will you be okay? And you're like, yeah, I'm a qualified project manager. I've done bigger stuff than this. And people are like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. But then that gives you equity. So like, oh, he probably knows what he's doing. Other things is that word of mouth, changing perception of how those others see you. Doing a bit of networking, so getting out to clubs, getting out to athletes, so that you're speaking to them and suddenly they see you as, actually, this person could help me. So, I mean, people aren't out to get what they can themselves, but if people can help them, a lot of people will go to that person for help. So it's how will other people see you? You can definitely influence that. Then we spoke about that idea of almost co-creating your brand, the meaning of it. So you know what your brand wants to be, and you need to tell the consumers. So communication is a complex process. It's political. So anything we do is political, even if it's a non-conscious thing. So just by walking into a room, that's a political statement, because people in that room are going to look at us. The research you've done to find out how you speak to these people is political. So we saw quite a lot of things on the news about going into personal profiles and giving them individual messages. So we're not getting to that level of things. But there's a political thing about thinking about how you segment your market, how you target your market. We need to understand that meaning is multi-layered. So people are complex, they will have multi-levels of meaning. So for example, one of the things in child development that you get are things like, if you see a child run along the street with a piece of wood tied to a string, people look at that and say, oh, look, that kid's pretending he's playing with a dog. So that's the common meaning. The next level of meaning, they might say, his friends might say, oh, that's little Timmy playing with that piece of wood. He thinks it's Bobby's dog. But at an individual level, little Timmy wants a dog. That really is a dog to him. So it's that level of meaning and levels of interpretation that we need to understand. So when we're communicating, we need to realise that there'll be agreement. People say, yeah, you're saying this. I agree with that. There'll be opposition. There'll be a resistance. One of the things we need to understand is people bring baggage to it. So as I said, in answer to some of the questions, some people will never get your message. They'll be like, who needs a coach? Who needs sports psychology? Who needs like any science involvement? And there'll be other people at the other end who are like, yep, I'm buying into this. And that's the people we want to target. So we need to think about what marketing does there. So there's a difference between cultural authority, which is where we try and influence people to think the way that we want them to think, through to the cultural strategy, where we're listening to the messages that perhaps they want to hear, that we're in agreement with, that we can help them with. So some of the things you need to think about with personal branding is being different. So standing out, being different to other people. But at the same time, you don't want to be that different that people won't like you. You want to be different enough that people are like, yep, I recognise that person A is different to person B, but actually I like both of them. I just happen to like person B better. So your brand needs to have appeal. But remember, it only needs to have appeal to your target market. So people outside the people who you want to sell to don't like you, don't like your attitude. In a commercial sense, it doesn't matter that much. If you could get them on board, great. If not, then it doesn't really matter. What does your target market care about? So one of the ways to do it is to tell your story. So I started off at the start of this by telling you about me, that I worked in engineering, did the degree as a mature student because I liked sport and wanted to know more, wanted to work in the sport industry. So always have a story. As humans, we've always communicated by telling stories, but have an authentic story. Make sure what you're saying is true. It relates to you, what you want to say. So there are brands who make up stories, and Hollister quite famously made up a story. I think it was about Jack Hollister, who'd gone off and travelled the world and had done lots of things and had settled down and had moved to California and had gone surfing. All completely made up. Just Abercrombie and Fitch decided to have a sub-brand. And they didn't really hide it that particularly well, but it had a story and it sounded authentic, and the photos used looked authentic, and that's fine. People bought into it in that kind of way that you're like, well, I know it's not true, but I like the story. So think of the story that I told at the start. So I told you that I'd worked in the industry, so you probably think, okay, he's worked in the industry, so he's not an academic. He's kind of been there and done that. So he probably knows what he's doing if that company survived, which it has. It's gone on to prosper. He's got a love of sport. He's did a bit of academic progression. He uses theory into practice, etc. So the idea of telling your story is selling what you do and who you work with. Like telling people about it. Just have a story. People will buy into that. And that's what becomes your marketing tool for speaking to people. But some of the considerations, make sure that your story is authentic. Don't be fake. Don't tell people that you're something that you're not. Also think about the values that you have. So what values are typical in your sport? What are the values at that level of sport? Is it winning at all costs, or is it winning fairly? what kind of things do people do to compete at that level? Also think about ethics. What information can you use to promote yourself? So testimonials, yes, but only if you've got agreement. Can that person give agreement so that over 18, are they in a position where they could agree to let you use a testimonial? Also things like morality. So what's right from wrong? So what are the right things? So that becomes a big question in marketing, is can you say you're going to do something when you're not sure if it will work? Can you promise an outcome? Who knows? So you need to know right from wrong for your brand. Where do you want it to sit? So a final poll. If it will work. No, can't get it to work. Right, so we'll look at one of the keywords you're probably going to use for so essentially the poll asked, what's the main reason that people use social media? And the answer is human interaction. We go on it to speed up. Giving it away. Yeah, we should get 100%. Right, let's just stop it there. Yeah, so as I said, human interaction, as you know, is really the main thing. People started to use social media for human interaction. So we definitely use it for shopping. We use it for information search, self-promotion, definitely. Watch cat videos, yeah, good 17% there. So people use it for a variety of things, but as humans, we like human interaction, and social media is a way of doing that. What they don't really use it for is to be sold products. So what can social media do for us to promote our product? So can reach a large and diverse range of people, can increase our personal profile. It's accessible, but it's not particularly free or easy. If it's done right, it takes quite a lot of work and investment. It invites interactive communication, so positive and negative, so we need to be prepared for some negative feedback and positive feedback. You can build relationships, so people all over the world, so it becomes that global thing. It's a trendy thing to do, so having social media profile is great. So I teach social media, I get all my students to use social media. I don't use it. I just haven't got the time, because it's that thing about not free or easy. I just don't have the time to dedicate to do it well, so I don't have social media profile. I do have a Facebook page, which is quite fictitious, so it's got the wrong age, the wrong date, and has the wrong location of where I live on it. But I don't do anything nasty on it. I just use it to look for bands that are touring that I want to go and see. So you could track how often your communication's being read, so you could do analytics on it. But there are pitfalls, potential for embarrassment, so lack of a coherent strategy. It requires resources, so it could be a huge drain on time. So I spoke to one person who said, oh, I don't use social media, it's too draining. I mean, I've got a couple of accounts and I only spend 2 hours a day on them. And I thought, wow, 2 hours a day is a lot of time. So reputations can be damaged. So on a large or small scale, there it's got a deliberate typo in it, that when we're in class, people will go, you put people consider public. But the idea is just to show how easy it is to do something wrong, to get that embarrassment that ruins reputations. It can look amateurish, so you want to have a line between authenticity and professionalism. It can be ineffective, post something and forget about it, and suddenly everyone's speaking about it. There's potential legal issues. It could be boring or ineffective content, so if you're not tuned into what your consumers want, they just track out of it and go to someone who gives them what they want. And there's lack of control on communications, meaning so you could say something expecting it to be interpreted in one way, it's interpreted in a different way. So you need to think about when you're building a brand and what strategies you can adopt to achieve that differentiation. One of the key ways is just to think about your experience as a consumer. So look at people you're in competition with. What prices are they charging? How do they market themselves? Do you want to be the same as them? Do you want to be different? Then as a consumer, if you want to be sold in a particular way, that probably reflects your values. So it's a good indicator of how you want to build your brand. You're going to want to build your brand on very similar values. So you need to think about what you can control. So in the marketing mix, we could think about the product, the price, place of promotion. We could control all those things. What we need to be aware of when we change one influences the other. So if we change our product, we might need to put the price up or down. If we change the place of sale, the price might need to go up or down. If we promote it in a certain way, that might affect how people perceive the product. So as we said, that if you give away your services for free, people might think, oh, that product's actually worthless. So we need to be careful how we promote it. Then we come back to that kind of core message that we're speaking about. Is that core product? What is the need? So there we've got don't sell the sausage, which I think quite a common phrase, but a lot of people tell me they've never heard it. So there's a saying in marketing, don't sell the sausage, sell the sizzle. What it means is people don't buy sausages, they buy the smell of them, the taste of them. The actual products are relevant. So they've got a couple of pictures. No one goes to a barbecue to eat food. You could do that in the house. What they go for is the picture underneath, for that kind of community, to be with friends, to have a laugh. The product is community engagement or communal engagement or just being with friends. So brands understand what the complex personal needs are, can start to think about that, can encode the message, so can start to build messages that look at emotive values. So in your sport, do people like other people? Is it good to be competitive? What kind of values do they have? So I wrote a paper once that said surfers are weird, dropping in a wave, and will quite happily threaten to smash your face in. Same time, that same person would drive in and risk their life to save you if you were in trouble. Because that's kind of the values. The values of that is that, yep, we're competitive as humans, but at the same time, we like each other. So think about your sport. What kind of values are in there? Also think about the symbolism. What kind of symbols? So things like logos that people you're associated with. So you've got the logos that we've used at the start of this. You could use those. They're meaningful. They kind of suggest some kind of level. But think about what matters to your consumers. So is it big logos, small logos? Is it who they associate with? What is it? What kind of things are you doing? So I'll give you an example. A band that I really like started to do meet and greet with the fans. And I know that big bands do it and they make a profit. And I kind of went off them a bit. I thought, I don't like the idea of them charging money to meet the fans. And then I read that what they do with all that money is give it to local charities. So every time they're in, they have a meet and greet, you pay £100, $100, whatever, meet the band, and every single penny of that goes to a local charity. And I thought, yeah, I actually like you a bit more now. Because that appeals to my core values is giving something back. So some of the key points we spoke about today are differentiation. So just be different. Find what makes you different to the person sitting next to you, the other 100 people in the webinar. What is it about you that's different? Then think about how you become an icon, how you become somebody that people speak about, or at least speak about your personality. Think about the symbolism that you can employ. Like, what imagery can you use to promote your product? Is it you? Are you the person? You want to be the face of the business? Or is it other imagery that shows? Something that links you to sport? And then think about the value fit. Think about your personal philosophy, how you see sport, how you see helping people in sport. So the key message, I suppose, is that marketing's complex and it must be managed. So there's potential for reputational financial damage. So have a think before you market. And that's kind of the idea behind this section. It's more, this is how complex it is, but a lot of it is simple. It's just really communication and being aware of what can work and what can't work. But don't just give it a go Have a think about it. So we've looked at marketing, we've looked at differentiation. It's the foundation of marketing, it's the desired outcome. We've looked at some marketing strategies. I haven't told you how to do it because it will be different for every single one of you. We've looked at the role of the consumer, how they interpret marketing, how they bring baggage to interpreting marketing. We've looked a little bit at the digital era, so social media. Have a look at what you like, what you don't like, what your target market like, what they're responding to, what they're not responding to. And I thought we are in kind of new times, in a sense of COVID and virtual learning, etc. Those strategies have been around for years. So one of the ones I started with was from 1912, and we moved to 1956, and we moved to 1960s. The reason those theories are still around is just the work. It doesn't matter that they worked for radio, then they worked for TV, and then they worked for internet, and then they worked for social media. They work. That kind of theoretical background still works in practice because all they really do is think about communication. So thanks for listening. I hope that hasn't been too complex or too boring. And I will have a quick look and see if there are any questions just before we finish. And I think our hosts might have a few words for you as well, too. Questions? Any advice on marketing if your product service is part-time, e.g. your main job is a lecturer at university, you do applied work on a private basis when time allows? I guess that is how much your university allows you to do it, if it's marketed with them or sort of in your own time. So I suppose it's exactly the same thing as if you had your normal product, is that just market it. But then it's I guess if you're connected to the university, you need to either differentiate that you're not connected to them or you are connected to them. That's the only difference I would say. So you mentioned using athlete results in market materials. Given that sports psychologists can't guarantee results that have no direct and measurable impact on results. Yes, exactly. So is it claiming you can get results is unethical and false advertising? Yeah, definitely. So it's like as a university, we can't say to people, come and do our course and you will definitely get a job doing something. But what you can do is say, these are the results we've achieved. So you could look at outcomes rather than saying this one thing affected that. So you could mention outcomes, but not necessarily the fact you've had some kind of input into that, but not necessarily that you alone have done it. So I wouldn't advertise to say that you can achieve things. Okay. Okay, so I think that's all the open questions. So hopefully I will hand over now to Mandy or Richard.
Paul, on behalf of everyone who has registered for today's session, I'd just like to sincerely thank you very much indeed for the information, the advice, the thoughts that you've shared to many people who really do cross over the boundaries from very kind of early stage career practitioners through to very experienced practitioners as well. But I think there have certainly been a number of points for us all to have taken from this session. And I suppose the thing that I would say is the whole issue of marketing has been very much missed throughout a lot of our training throughout the years. And this is a real welcome addition. And your thoughts, I'm sure, will go a long way to reassuring a lot of people who are starting out on their ventures, and as I said, so are quite a way through their ventures in terms of being a practitioner. So thank you very much indeed. And I'll pass over to Rob just to see if he has any further points to conclude.
Yeah, no, I think Paul, just thank you again from myself. It's been great, and certainly I've learned a lot from it, and I'm sure a lot of other people have as well. So just a big thank you, and once again a thank you to Paul and Denise for the hard work and getting this off the ground. It's been great. So thank you very much. Hope everybody's enjoyed it. Please do get in touch if you've got any questions, either with Paul or in relation to today's seminar, or us as a committee as well, in relation to anything else. Please do get in touch. Thank you for your time.